The John Morris Show, episode 67.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
You are now listening to the John Morris Show. My name is John Morris, Army veteran turned freelance web developer, and each week I bring you a fresh look into the latest news, advice, and next steps for the self-made web designer and developer to help you reach your dream of coding for a living faster. Thanks for giving me some of your time today. Now, let the episode begin. I'm super excited to say that this episode is sponsored by TopTal. Now, finding and hiring talented developers is really hard. Not to mention, after the large piles of resumes and profiles you have to sift through, once you find a reasonable candidate, it's difficult to evaluate a developer's skill unless you're a developer yourself. But TopTal makes it easy. TopTal is a large network of the top 3% of software developers in the world. And to be accepted, applicants go through a rigorous screening process that tests technical expertise, problem-solving ability, communication skills, and more. And the acceptance rate is just 3%. TopTal's team of engineers meets with you to understand your needs and handpicks just a few developers from their network for you according to your needs. Once you interview a developer, you can start working with them on a full-time, part-time, or hourly basis for as long as you need. It's very flexible. In fact, they've been so successful that they offer a no-risk trial period for all engagements. If you're not satisfied, you don't pay. And thousands of companies, including Airbnb, JP Morgan, Zendesk, and more, have turned to TopTal when they need developers because TopTal allow them to hire rapidly, with confidence, and hire only the best. So go to johnmorrisonline.com/TopTal, that's TOPTAL, today to start working with top-tier developers. John Morris Show listeners will receive 1 week of TopTal development credit and a no-risk trial period for up to 2 weeks. So go to johnmorrisonline.com/TopTal now to sign up. Oh, and for all my developer friends, this is a network you want to be on. Forget having to compete with millions of other developers in those open networks. Get on TopTal and place yourself in the top 3% of software developers in the world, and let the projects come to you. You can visit johnmorrisonline.com/TopTal and click on the Apply as a Freelancer button to get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the John Morris Show. I am your host, John Morris, and this is episode number 67. Now, I've got a really good show for you today. I'm excited about this one. In the trends section, I'm going to be talking about this trend that I've seen, and I think others have seen as well, and that is the advancement or the growth of website building or application building tools that are out there. You may have seen the common ones you could think of are the CMSs like WordPress and Joomla and the others that are out there. There's also within those frameworks or those systems, there's other tools. For example, I recently emailed about one called Layers. That's kind of a page building tool. You know, there's just a number of other ones that are coming out that are really kind of site builder type tools. And I want to talk about, you know, I get emails from people where they are a little bit afraid of that kind of development. So I'm going to talk about why you shouldn't be afraid of that and some things you can do to prepare yourself for that trend, because I do think it is a trend. I do think we are moving that way a little bit, but we've actually seen this before, and I'm going to talk about that. So in the mindset section, now, I don't know if you know this, but apparently WordPress is for suckers, and I am one of those suckers. I recently sent out an email about WordPress and why I think it's smart to develop on a system like that. And I got an email back from somebody who essentially calling me a sucker. And so I want to dive into that email a little bit, and I want to talk about the mindset behind it and why it's so dangerous and something that you should really watch out for. Because, you know, I was actually talking with my brother that if you on my mailing list, you know, it was my brother and some of his friends who that email was talking about, who had initially kind of snickered at me about WordPress. Anyway, I was actually talking with him about this, and as he noted, and I can agree with, that's kind of a trend in the IT world. And so I want to talk about that and why it's a dangerous mindset that, again, we should try to avoid. It's really going to hold you back, especially considering what we're going to be talking about in the trend section. In the text section, I'm going to be getting into some Flexbox examples. So if you're not familiar with Flexbox, or you are but haven't fully learned it yet, then I'm going to be walking through in a screencast where you're going to be able to see the code and everything. I'm going to be walking through some examples of how to use Flexbox. So you'll definitely want to stick around for that. Also, in the freelance section, I'm going to get into how to write job proposals on Upwork that win. So I recently did a video on this. I'll let you know where you can find that video, but I also want to talk a little bit about it in the podcast as well. So we're going to be diving into that. And then, as always, we're going to be doing our weekly Q&A. So if you haven't subscribed to this show yet, be sure to do that. You could do so on iTunes at johnmorrisonline.com/iTunes, on your Android device at johnmorrisonline.com/SoundCloud, and of course on YouTube at johnmorrisonline.com/YouTube. Also, this show is able to stay intact because of donations from listeners like you. If you want to become a supporting listener, you can head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. And there's a number of different rewards over there. For example, I have Patreon-only courses that are available for certain levels of patronage. I have priority Q&A access, so if you have a burning question that you absolutely want me to answer, that's a good place to do it. And then, of course, you just help me keep the show running with your support, so I'd appreciate that. So again, that's johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon. All right, let's get into it. You're listening to John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. Here's another great resource for you, ZipTask. Have you ever wished you could just jump on live with a developer and talk to them face-to-face before hiring them? If you could, there's no doubt you'd know whether you wanted to hire them or not by the end of that conversation. But instead, most freelance sites make you wade through a mountain of resumes and profiles before you ever actually get to talk to someone. Not ZipTask. ZipTask is all about speed. You can instantly connect with developers on all their devices and immediately start chatting about your project. No mountain of resumes, no guesswork, just a real live person waiting to help. Even better, every audio, video, and text communication is recorded so your developer is held 100% accountable. No he said, she said. Plus, ZipTask works with only the best developers and uses both state-of-the-art technology and real humans to find and surface the top developers, so you always have the best developer for your project needs. So to start talking to a real qualified developer in the next few seconds, head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/ZipTask. That's ZIPTASK to get started. Again, that's johnmorrisonline.com/ZipTask to start talking with a real live developer in the next few seconds. Welcome back to the John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. In this segment, I want to talk about this growing trend of web design tools that we're seeing kind of grow in the advent of these sorts of tools. And what I sense from a lot of people that I talk to about this is the fear of those tools and them empowering clients to kind of build sites on their own, and developers kind of going the way of the dodo bird. And so what this is again, there's more and more development, as I see it, more and more development is morphing into not just coding, but knowing how to use different tools. So a tool like WordPress, or as I mentioned on a email in my email list, one that I use called Layers, and there's Beaver Builder for WordPress, and there's a number of different ones that are out there. There's static site builders. There's, I think, the Grid was one that we've seen maybe a little bit, although I'm not necessarily saying I haven't used that one. I've seen mixed reviews on it. But anyway, there is this growing kind of market for these kinds of tools whose aim is to help clients themselves or help people build websites a lot easier without having to actually know how to code. And I often get emails from people asking me about this, asking me if this is something to be scared of or telling me it's something that they're worried about. And I don't think that you should be. And here's why. We've kind of seen this before, actually, right? We've seen it in other areas. The example that I like to use is building a house. And, back, a couple hundred years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, we didn't have all of the tools that we have today. So, we didn't have an electric saw. We didn't have a backhoe. We didn't have any of those things. But people still built houses. They just had to do it by hand. They had to do it with a handsaw. They had to do it, with a shovel and so forth. But they still built houses. So as the technology advanced, people that could build a house, like that didn't go away. You don't see people, you see some people, I guess, who build their own house, but there's still a very, very, very large market for someone who knows how to build a house, who knows how to use all of those tools. And it's never reached a point where you can just push a button and have a house built, right? So I think this is similar to what we're seeing in web design and web development. The difference between 100 years ago and now in the advancement of the tools is that you can build a lot better house than you could back then because of the tools. I mean, some of the houses you see today that people own are like castles in the Middle Ages. Yet these aren't kings or queens. These are just, regular people. They obviously make good money, but it's not someone who runs the entire country. And so it's allowed us to make, and people who, I take myself, I'm not some gajillionaire or anything like that, but the house that I live in, 200 years ago, that would have been the kind of house that someone who was, either high up in government or extremely wealthy owned, right? So it's just allowed things to get better for everybody. And I think that is what we're going to see with the advent of these tools. It's not that there won't be an avenue for developers. It's that you as a developer will be able to build a lot better end product. So I see two paths forming here for developers, and I think both are legitimate. The first one is kind of your hardcore coder who really will probably transition more into, instead of building the end product, will actually transition into building the tools themselves that create the end product. For example, you take, I lived in a town in Iowa, Pella, Iowa, and there's a factory there called Vermeer. And what Vermeer did is they built farm equipment. And so the farmer would then come buy the equipment from Vermeer and use it to farm. So there was still an avenue for the farmer, but then you had the people who actually built the equipment that would do the machining and building all the steel work and all of that part, who were really kind of deep into that technical side of building the machine. And then you had the farmer who knew how to use the machine in order to grow food. So I see the deep hardcore coders as like the person doing the machining and the steel work and so forth. And, at that factory, the people that do work there and know how to do that, they make really good money. Now, and you could debate about whether that's what they really want to do, et cetera, et cetera. But if hardcore programming is really what you want to do, I think there's always going to be an avenue for that. You just may be working more on building the tools. Then there's the other side of it, which is someone who is an expert in using the tools themselves to create something else. And again, I think both of these are legitimate. I don't think one or the other, as this progresses, makes you less of a developer. It just makes you different. Now, you could argue about the name, right? Whether someone who can't code is a developer or not. We could go back and forth about the name. But again, is a builder less of a builder because they use an electric saw and not a handsaw? Or because they use a backhoe and not a shovel? I mean, you still have to know what you're doing. So not knowing how to code, or knowing how to code, gives you an advantage because you can actually work on the tool itself, right? Let's say my grandpa was actually like this. My grandpa would do steel work and so forth. I grew up in a small town, Nebraska City. He would do steel work in that town, and he would work on he'd work on equipment, tractors. He did all sorts of stuff. But one of the things he also did was build tools. And so he'd get a lot of people who would come to him to have him build some sort of custom tool for something that they were working on. And if he was working on, maybe somebody's car, or somebody's tractor, or doing some sort of steel work for somebody, and in his mind he thought, gee, it'd be nice if I had a tool that did this certain thing. He was a welder. He'd just go build it. He'd go build the tool. So knowing how to do that gives you an advantage. Absolutely. And I would always recommend that even if you're going to go the route of using the tools, that you know how to code some so that you can do that if you need to. But it's absolutely okay to use tools built by other people. And, this kind of goes into the mindset section that I'm talking about coming up. But you get a lot of people who will be kind of critical of that. But at the end of the day, what matters is the end product. What the client cares about is the end product, not necessarily the specifics of how it's built. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying, you could build something really crappy and it doesn't matter. That's not really what I'm saying. But a lot of these tools are just fine and the code and what they output is just fine. It's not completely terrible to the point where, you're making, putting your client in a bad situation. That's not the case. Now, you might have people that try and convince you of that, but it's just not the case. So, again, it's okay to use these sorts of tools because at the end of the day, what matters to the client is the end product, and you don't always have to make it so hard on yourself. So, I bring this up for two reasons. There's two things that I want you to get out of this. One, I want you to understand that going forward, what you're asked to do from clients may not always be coding. And that may slowly morph to where more and more you're being asked to know how to use a different array of tools. You may have one client that says, hey, can you build me a site with this? Another client, can you build me a site with this? Another client, can you build me a site with this? I actually was on Upwork the other day kind of poking around and did a search for PHP. This is interesting. This is some of what sparked this. I did a search for just PHP on Upwork. And I would say at that time of the first 10 projects that were listed on them, I think six or seven were WordPress projects. So in the PHP kind of category, most of the projects actually related to a tool that's built using PHP, not PHP itself. I found that very, very interesting. And I think more and more we're going to see that sort of advent. But there will always be a space, and this is the second thing that I want you to get out of this. One, again, know that's probably that things tend to be trending that way more and more. And then B, or the second thing, don't be afraid of it. You're not less of a developer if you use a tool. There will always be people. This is the critical thing for you to understand. There will always be people who just want it done for them. They don't even want to mess with the tool. Now, all you have to do to verify this fact is step outside of your maybe developer community where the people you know are developers like you, and go talk to someone who knows nothing about websites. Right? Go to say a local business in your area. And you'll see how you have people who aren't even familiar with, struggle to use email or Facebook. And these people are out there wanting to run businesses. They know now that they need a website to do it and so forth, and they don't even want to mess with it. Or you have people who may know some of that stuff, but it's not what they love to do, so they just don't want to hassle with it, and they'll hire people. There will always be people who just want it done for them. And so there will always be a market for someone who knows how to use the tools. And then the final thing is using the tools can often be, and I would say in most cases probably is, smarter than coding it yourself. In the mindset section, I'm going to talk about an email I received from someone who basically was calling me a sucker and an idiot because I use WordPress. And I wrote a follow-up email where this is exactly what I talked about, that is it smarter to use a system that you are the only one who developed it, you're the only one who works on it, you're the only one who supports it, and it only gets used on your sites and your client sites. That its usage is a very, very limited set of websites, and its support, development-wise, is just you. Versus a system that has millions upon millions of websites using it. It's supported by hundreds of thousands of developers. It's got a company that has millions and millions of dollars behind it. Which one is smarter to use? Which one's going to be ultimately better for your client in the long run? Which one is going to be more likely to find any bugs or security vulnerabilities? Which one's going to have people constantly work on making it more efficient? Which one is going to have people who pore over every single line of code to make sure it's secure, to make sure it's efficient, to make sure it's written the best way it possibly can? Which one is going to have multiple iterations where it has major updates within a single year? It's going to be that latter one. And so for your client, it's the better tool in most cases. Now, the first option where you code it yourself is better for your ego. But I don't think that should be the standard by which you use to assess what's best for your client, is what feeds your ego the best. So if you're someone who's sitting here screaming at your computer screen right now, listen to what I'm saying, get over yourself. Get over yourself. Do what's actually best for your client, not what's best for you, but you're trying to pretend like it's best for your client. All right, so that's what I want you to get out of this, and to know that this is a movement that seems to be happening, to pay attention to it. Don't be afraid of it. And look, if you want to stick to hardcore programming, absolutely. Just know that what you do may slowly start to shift to you building the tools, not necessarily you building the end product, the website or the application. And that, hey, at the end of the day, a lot of us would probably rather build the tools. So, all right, coming up next, as I mentioned a couple times, we're going to be getting into our mindset section. We'll be talking about WordPress and how apparently WordPress is for suckers, and I am one of those suckers. You're listening to John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Complete Web Developer course by Rob Percival on udemy.com, where you can learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, MySQL, WordPress, mobile apps, and more inside one convenient course, so you can shortcut the time it takes to start earning your full-time income as a web developer. John Morris Show listeners can get an exclusive 85% discount on the course by visiting johnmorrisonline.com/CWDC. That's johnmorrisonline.com/CWDC. Welcome back to the John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. In this segment, I want to talk about this idea or this mindset. So I recently sent out an email, and in the email, I outlined how I had this instance where I was hanging out with one of my brothers who happens to be in the IT field as well, and some of his friends or his coworkers, and they all work at an ISP. And so they're, these guys they know what they're doing. They're IT guys that are pretty smart, and most of them have been doing this a while. And so, they're not dummies, they're not noobs or anything like that. These are guys that, they know what they're doing. And somehow along the way, the topic of WordPress came up. Now, I already know among developers that are especially more on the network side, but even just the larger kind of programming community, that when WordPress comes up, almost always the thing that you immediately get is a snicker. Now, I actually wasn't the one that brought it up. Someone else had, because I usually know better, because I just don't even want to get into the conversation about it, because it's just, it can be very, very annoying, because often people's perception of WordPress is based off what it was 2 or 3 years ago. And so a lot of the arguments you hear have already been kind of dealt with and taken care of and so forth. And there's just so much that you have to get into when you have that conversation. But it had come up, and essentially the response that my brother's coworkers, not necessarily my brother, but had given was to snicker. I mean, they didn't just snicker. There was a conversation, but that was the general gist of the conversation, is they were snickering at anybody who didn't know how to use WordPress or used WordPress for a number of different reasons. And so I'd written an email about telling this story and was saying that, you know, you may think that, but WordPress is, I think the latest figure I've seen, powers about 26% of the web, meaning about 26% of all websites run on WordPress. I'm going off memory on that number, so don't quote me exactly, but it's something like that. It's a very large portion of the web. In fact, I think it's the single largest framework or system of that is used on the web. It's the most common one of anything that's out there, from my recollection. So while you may snicker at it, and the point of the email was, look, you may look at the code and say this, that, or the other, and snicker and whatever, but it powers that large a portion of the web. You can't ignore it. And it actually represents the market for web developers. The WordPress community is a very lucrative market. And so I'll work with it, because that's what clients want. And, it's not some, I could hear people saying, well, yeah, it may be what clients want, but your job is to do the right thing for the client. And if they're going to use a system has all these security vulnerabilities and the code is junk and this, that, the other, then, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And I mean, anybody who says that, I would challenge them to, okay, go build your version then, right? Anyway, so I got this response back to this email, and it went like this. It said, if your figures are accurate, this goes to show the lack of education, motivation, and willingness to go the extra mile. If you're communicating in search of work, you can take me off your list. If I need someone to help, I'll find a real programmer. I have been doing this for 38 years and find those who have to have their code libraries developed for them are exactly why your older brother and friends snickered. WordPress is for the suckers who look to idiots like you to make their plugins. And honestly, this isn't the first time that I've heard this. So I'm always a little curious when I get an email like this, especially when someone says they've been doing it for 38 years, because I've actually worked with developers, like directly with developers who have 20, 30 years of experience. And there's often a common thread that they tend to, and I'm not saying this about everyone, but in my experience, they tend to run their mouth. But when you actually go to look at what they've done, they have a really, really hard time in today's environment of creating applications or creating anything that's any good. So I just had a hunch. He had used an email address and had a URL that wasn't like a Google or Yahoo. So I went to it to see if that happened to be his website, and kind of looked through it and saw that, he was kind of the IT person for that website. It was a company, and he was the IT person for that website. So assume that he had built that website. It kind of led you to believe that. Anyway, the website, I'm not going to link to it or tell you who this is. I don't want to dime anybody out like that, but believe me when I say this website was horrendous. I mean, I see people who are just starting out in web development and have been at it for like a month who have better looking websites than what this guy had. And I find that's so often the case, that you have these developers who have been doing this for a long time, and they become so jaded and hard-headed, and that the way that they survive is by being hypercritical of other people and ignoring the fact that their own stuff is complete crap. And they're not willing to grow because it's scary. It can be, there's a lot of fear that can be associated with new things coming out. And so the way that they deal with it is that they just lock themselves into this box and don't realize just how bad the stuff that they're creating is. I mean, it was bad. Not only not mobile, I mean, it's a site that in the 90s you would have looked at and went, oh, that's not great. Like, it would have been bad in the 90s, and this is 2016. It was very, very awful. And normally I'm not hard on people for stuff like that because most of the people I deal with are new and they're learning. But you're talking about someone who has been doing this for 38 years, according to him, and now is being hypercritical of other people. I mean, it just shows this mindset that is extremely, extremely limiting. So why did I want to bring this up to you guys? One, I want you to be very, very careful of that kind of thinking, of being so scared of the new and what's coming and unwilling to change, because technology is changing so fast. It's just a known thing. Humans oftentimes have a hard time with change. And in the technology field, it's changing so fast, it can be incredibly scary about what's coming. Am I going to be able to figure it out? Am I going to be able to do that? And there's two approaches you can take. You can either take the approach that this guy took, which is to lock himself in this mental box, not learn anything new, and just be hyper defensive against everybody else so that if anybody tries to attack him, he's already got a defense mechanism in place to deal with it, and never grow, never learn, never get any better, never try anything new, and never advance. And your output will be junk. So that's one path you can take. Obviously, I don't recommend that path. Or the other path that you can take is to really be the opposite, to be open to it, to look at everything and not necessarily have some hard-headed opinion one way or the other. Now, I do think it's important for developers to have a perspective, but you also have to be open-minded to what's coming. You have to be able to embrace that change and understand that the market's going to go where it's going to go. That's ultimately the thing to understand. Regardless of what you may happen to think, ultimately who decides where things go are the end users, and developers hate that. Developers want to control as much as they can, and you'll hear, I promise you I'll get comments from people who will say something along those lines of, well, you can't just do whatever the market will go where it goes. Now that doesn't mean that developers don't have some say in it, but ultimately end users are going to want what they want. And that's people using your clients' websites and then your clients as well. And so you have to be willing to understand that and move and adapt in order to keep pace with everything that's coming. So you can't be afraid of this kind of stuff. And as I talked about in the previous section with tools, not code, that's something, again, you can't be afraid of the fact that 10 years from now, what a developer does, for a lot of developers do, is work with tools on top of the code, not the code itself. That's okay. Again, one of the examples I used back there is someone building a house less of a builder because they use a backhoe to dig the foundation and a electric skill saw instead of a manual handsaw? Does that make them less of a builder? No, they still have to. There's still a ton that they have to do. It's just making their job easier. It's okay to make it easier on yourself. And tools like WordPress and the other ones that are out there will allow you to do that. So don't be afraid of it, and be willing to be open to that and embrace that change and the things that are coming. So I think more and more that, as I mentioned in the previous segment, I think more and more we're going to see the advent of tools like that. I think there will always be a place for coders, but I think there's definitely a growing avenue for people who aren't like deep technical coders, but understand how to use the tools that are out there, how to put things together, and understand the broader idea of composition of building a page, of building a cohesive site, of matching clients' needs to the function and the look and feel and so forth. There's a growing avenue for people who are experts at that and not necessarily the kind of deep dive coders that what you kind of have that mix of today. So choose your path. You could take either. Either is fine. If you want to be a hardcore programmer, go for it. Or if you want to be more of a builder and you're not making the backhoe, you're not building the saw, but you're using the backhoe and you're using the saw to build a house, then by all means, go for it. All right, coming up next, we're going to get into Flexbox. I'm going to be showing you some specific Flexbox examples. This is a full-on screencast, so you're going to be able to see all the code, exactly what I'm doing. So you definitely want to stick around for that. You're listening to John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. Hey, everybody. As you probably know, I constantly harp on using content to help you grow your audience and build your credibility as a web developer. But your web presence is nothing without a great hosting provider. So if you haven't yet, get your website up and running with a fast, reliable, and well-supported web host, Bluehost, for less than $6 a month. You can check it out and get Bluehost's best price over at johnmorrisonline.com/Bluehost. Welcome back to the John Morris Show, johnmorrisonline.com. All right, this segment, tech section, we're going to be talking about Flexbox. Now, if you're not familiar with Flexbox, this is a CSS module. And the idea, it's kind of a newer CSS module, and the idea behind it is it's designed to provide a more efficient way to lay out items and to align them, to distribute space, and so forth. And it helps solve a lot of common issues that you run into as a developer. And so as you'll see here, it can make some certain things that you try to do on a normal basis a lot simpler. So I have a few examples that we're going to walk through to kind of give you an idea, a little bit of how this works, some of the basics of how it works, and then some of what you can do to kind of spark your interest to dive deeper into this. All right, so I'm going to walk through these examples. Now, the first one is just the standard, I call the standard usage. This is the way that when I first looked at it that I thought to use it. And that is just aligning kind of three elements across like this and having them evenly spaced across, even sizes, etc. Now, normally when you do this, you have to kind of go in there and finagle with this a little bit to get this to work right. So what I want to show you is over with Flexbox how simple this is. So what I've done, I'll scroll down to the HTML real quick. Under standard usage, I've just created a parent div with 3 child divs in it. And so given this the class of parent and then the 3 child divs a class of child. So very straightforward HTML. There's a paragraph inside each one with a number of that box. So very, very simple and standard HTML. But if we come up to CSS, now, I don't have to do anything with trying to figure out percentages and so forth. With Flexbox, all I need to do is set the parent to display flex and then select my flex direction. So in this case, I want it to flex. You can do horizontal or vertical. So in this case, I'm doing horizontal. So I'm setting the flex direction to row. And then in the child, I set flex grow to 1. So 1 is, it's not like a pixel size. It's really kind of a placeholder that when you set it to 1, you essentially want it to, if all the child elements are set to 1, they're going to be evenly spaced. If you set like 2 of them to 1 and 1 of them to 2, then that 2, the child element that you have set to 2 will be like twice the size of the other ones. And so it's kind of a proportional value to help you distribute the size of your child elements. So we set it to flex grow 1, and that helps it distribute. Now let me just get rid of this for a second so you can see what these would look like by default. So if I refresh this, you'll see that by default, this is what you would normally expect, and then you'd have to try and figure out the widths and percentages and so forth. But with Flexbox, all you have to do is set it to flex grow like that, and now these are all evenly distributed across there. So that's it's a really handy tool, and really just even that basic usage help solve a problem that, can be kind of annoying as a developer. Now, the nice thing is that there's a number of other things that you can do. So the next example is vertical centering. So if you've ever tried to center something vertically, you know how annoying that can be. But you see here, I have, again, my parent div, which is this dark blue, and then I have 3 child divs. And these 3 child divs are centered vertically. They're perfectly centered vertically. So how do you do that with Flexbox? Well, I've come down here, and again, for this one, I've created a new set of divs here. And the only thing I've did is added another class called center. So I still have my parent and child divs, but then I've added a class of center so that I can target those. And up here, so they're still, these boxes are still taking on all of the elements of the parent and child. So display flex direction row, flex row 1, that's all still there. But then under center, I sent the parent to a height of 200 pixels. So I'm setting a specific height for the parent. So it's 200 pixels. And then I'm setting the height, the main thing, I'm setting the height then width, but the main thing is the height to 50 pixels. Now by default, this box, these child boxes, would be at the top. They'd be up here at the top, and then there'd be a bunch of space down the bottom. But you can see that they're centered. The reason that works is because I've then set margin auto, and it's on all 4 sides, so it's on top and bottom as well. So if you set a margin of auto on the top and bottom in a Flexbox, it'll center it for you. So just like with regular CSS, how if you set the margin to auto on the left and the right, you get a centered box. Here, with a Flexbox, it works top and bottom as well. So you can perfectly center things not only horizontally, but vertically. And that's all you have to do. You have your explicit heights, and then you set the margin on the top and bottom to auto, and it works. So again, something that's really, really handy for vertical centering. The next one here is this justified. And so what this does is essentially, let's say you have 4 boxes here, and we've set, if we come into the CSS here under child justified, I've set an explicit width of 300 pixels. So let's say that you need to do that for some reason in your layout. So these are all 300 pixels. This is going to justify them to essentially try to make them fit. And so this will make sense when we do this. So if we come down here, you can see that now the 4th box, because these are set to kind of an explicit height or width, it wraps this 4th box down below. And if we kind of squeeze this, you'll see that it then turns them into 4 across like this. And eventually it gets to a point where it puts them top to bottom like this. And so that's what the justified allows us to do. So if we come down here, you can see I've got my parent class again, and then I've just added justified to each of the child, to all of these so that I can target it. And if we come up in our CSS under justified, then we have the flex flow set to row wrap. And what that means is flex flow is really a shortcut for flex direction and flex wrap. So the first one is the flex direction, so row, so horizontally, and then the flex wrap is wrap, so it'll wrap them. And then we're setting the justify content to space around. So this defines the alignment along the main axis. So it helps to distribute the extra free space left over when all the flex items on a line are inflexible. And space around means that items are evenly distributed in the line with equal space around them. So we've set, again, those are the 2 things that we have set here for the parent. And then in the child, all we did is we just kind of sized it out here. So you can see it had a specific height and width, a padding, and a margin. There's nothing Flexbox related in here. So it's all in the parent. And that allows that to then kind of flow around like you saw as the screen resizes. So, again, it's not something that you necessarily use on every layout, but if this is something that you need to do for a particular layout, you can see it's really, really easy to do inside of Flexbox. The last one here then is this navigation centering. So let's say you have a right navigation over here, and then as you get to kind of the mobile layout, you want to center that. Now, I've done this, and it can be quite annoying without Flexbox to get this to center how you want it to and work kind of flawlessly across different screen sizes. But you can see here with Flexbox, once we get to 768 pixels, now it's even. These are all evenly centered across here. And then as we get smaller, these will actually go down to a top to bottom view like this, like you would see on a lot of mobile, on a lot of sites with your mobile device. Now, again, normally there's a lot of code to make that happen, but with Flexbox, it's really pretty straightforward. So if we come down here for the HTML, we have just a unordered list with regular list items, nothing special here, and it has a class of navigation. So this is a pretty basic HTML unordered list. If we come up here then under navigation, now there's a decent amount of CSS here, but most of it actually has to do with the styling. So we do list style none, margin 0. This is nothing related to Flexbox, the background color. Then we do display flex, and we do justify content, and we set it to flexed end, which means the items are packed towards the end, which is why on the normal view, they're over to the right side because they're all packed to the right side. We have our styling for our link here. This is all normal. This has nothing to do with Flexbox. So far, we've only had 2 lines for Flexbox. Now we get into our media queries, and so we see at 768 pixels, which is kind of a standard breakpoint to target. We switch this to justify content space around, and remember, with space around, it distributes the items are evenly distributed in the line with equal space around them. So it just tries to distribute them equally across the vertical axis there. Okay, and because we've targeted this as a vertical. This will also work horizontally, by the way. Flexbox doesn't really, it's kind of direction agnostic. So this stuff will all work both vertically and horizontally. It so happens that here we're working with it vertically. So it just tries to evenly distribute them. All right, so that's why when we go to, if we get to this view, this is that CSS that does that, the 768 pixel media query, okay? So then as we get smaller, we get down to 600 pixels, we actually change this to FlexFlow column wrap. So again, FlexFlow is a shortcut or a shorthand term for flex direction and flex wrap. So here we set this to column. Column is essentially vertical. So row is horizontal for flex direction. Column is essentially vertical. So here we've set it to vertical or column, and we've set it to wrap so that they'll wrap. Lines will wrap to the next line. And so the rest of the CSS here is just colors and padding and border and so forth. This has nothing to do with the actual layout and Flexbox. So when we set it to column wrap, then what happens is, as we've seen, as we get down below 600 pixels, it then goes to a vertical alignment here, just like that. So that effect, just like that, of being to the right in the normal view, being distributed once you get to 768 pixels, and then being vertical once you get below 600 pixels, that entire effect is done with what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code. That's pretty awesome. I guess I haven't looked at it, but in my head, I imagine that without Flexbox, it would take a lot more than 6 lines of code to make that happen. So very, very cool tool. And Flexbox, if you haven't got into it, haven't done any learning with it, definitely something that I suggest you get into. There's a lot more that you can do with it. There's, you can get really complicated and really fancy with it, but this should give you an idea of, one, kind of the basic stuff that you need to do to make it work, and then hopefully inspire you to dive more into it as well. Now, I know I always get asked on these kinds of tutorials, people want access to the source code. I'm going to tell you going forward, the majority of my source code is going to be available over on Patreon to people. I have all my source code available that I have access to, that I've created over the years for all my tutorials, is now over on Patreon for people who are a supporter of the show at the $3 a month level or higher. So that's where this source code is going to be, and most of the source code going forward is going to be available there as well, simply because I want to give people who are supporting the show on Patreon, I want to give them some sort of bonuses, and so the source code is going to be what that is, or one of the things that is. All right, so if you want the source code, johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon, become a supporter of the show at the $3 a month level or higher, and you will get access to this source code plus all of my other source code that's available. All right, coming up next, we're going to get into the freelance section. We're going to be talking about how to write job proposals or bids on Upwork that will actually get you hired. And I'm going to be going through the framework that I use when I write my proposals back. It's a 3-step framework. I've used it time and time again. It's one that I figured out going through the struggles of figuring out Upwork, and got me to the point where I was able to start really landing a lot of the jobs that I bid on, and so forth. So I'm going to show you that 3-step framework coming up next. You're listening to John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. So I just realized something. I'm always harping on how important creating blog content is for getting new clients to your web design business. But what if you don't have a blog and you're not sure how to get one set up? Well, don't worry, because I've just created a new tutorial on how to start your blog in less than 15 minutes. So in less than 15 minutes from now, you could have your blog up and running and creating content that's going to help you attract new clients for your web design business. In order to take this tutorial, you want to head on over to johnsbloggingtutorial.com. Again, that's johnsbloggingtutorial.com. Head on over and let's get your blog started today. Welcome back to the John Morris Show, johnmorrisonline.com. In our freelance segment here, then, we're going to get into how to write job proposals on Upwork that win. Now, before I get into this, this was one of the things when I first started out on Upwork that I really had a problem with. It's one of the most frustrating things. If you've been on Upwork or Elance or Freelancer, it can be one of the most frustrating things because you'll go bid, on jobs, and you'll write up a proposal. You'll think your focus will be on being accurate, being friendly, trying to give them the best value at the lowest price, etc. And you'll go on there and you'll see one of two things, and both are annoying. You'll either see that it seems like there's a tendency for the lowest bidder to win the job, and that you start to think, well, the only way I can win isn't because of my proposal. It's just I have to be the lowest price, which can be really frustrating. This happens a little more rarely, but every once in a while, you'll see somebody who's on there and they bid way higher than everybody else, and then they're the ones that get the job. And so it can be really frustrating trying to figure out what is going on. Why is it that, these people, they'll have this really high bid and they'll win, but then there's the other ones, like, it seems confusing. And so I spent a lot of time working through this and hundreds of proposals that I submitted trying to figure this out, and was able to kind of develop a framework that has worked really, really well for me. So I want to share that with you. All right, so why is this so important? Well, you want to get to the point where you get lots of invites each day. You actually get invited to bid on jobs. By the time I kind of left Elance, I got to the point where I was getting probably 15 to 20 invites a day, to the point where I actually had to turn my availability off because it was working against me, because the way Elance worked, and if you turn down so many jobs, then it was a bad thing or whatever. So many invites, became a bad thing. Well, I was getting so many a day that there was no way I could do every single one of them. So I'd have to go in and turn my availability off so that I wouldn't get these invites and it wouldn't hurt me. So that's the point that you want to get to, because it's a lot easier to win a job when someone's actually invited you to it. But you don't get there until you learn how to build on what I call cold proposals and get hired. And cold proposals are when someone doesn't invite you, when you go out and search them out and you just bid on them and they know nothing about you. It's a lot harder to get that job because chances are that person hasn't gone out and invited people and you weren't one of those people. So either they saw your profile and there was something that turned them off, or they just never saw it. And so they know that they haven't invited you. So I call these cold proposals. And the thing is if you can get good at cold proposals and you can start winning cold proposals, then you're going to get more job history on the freelance site. And that's going to help you move up the rankings, and that's going to lead to you getting more invites. And then if you get good at cold proposals and you use the framework that I show you and you get good at using it, you'll win more of those warm proposals, of those jobs that you're invited to as well. And then you kind of control your own destiny when it comes to the freelance site. So being able to win cold proposals, being able to go out there, find a job, bid on it without that person inviting you, and actually get hired and win that job is really one of the kind of key skills of being successful on Upwork, because it leads to a lot of other things that help you in the long run on these freelance sites. So very, very important skill for you to get down. Now, there is a framework that I use for doing this, and it's a 3-step framework, and those 3 steps are research, framework, and price. All right. So it sounds a little weird because I'm using framework twice, but we'll talk about what that is. So the first thing to do is to do some research. Now, I recently created a video where I actually go on Upwork and I show you where to research, what to look for, how to find it extremely quickly. And you can find that over on johnmorrisonline.com/proposals. I'll set up a redirect link that'll link you to that video. So johnmorrisonline.com/proposals, you can find that video where it's a screencast of me actually going on Upwork. But I do want to talk about this a little bit. So what do you look for when you're doing your research? Well, on Upwork, there's a lot of job proposals where at the end of their whole description, there will be questions that they want you to answer when you submit your proposal. That's the first thing that you should look for on a proposal. Why? Because those give you an insight into the things that are most important to them, the things that they absolutely have to be answered. They wouldn't have put them there if they weren't highly, highly important to them. So you want to look for those questions, and those should, when you find, not everybody asks those questions, but when you find those questions on a proposal, those are the things that really should kind of guide the way you look at the rest of the project. So you want to look for those questions. That's the first thing, to get an idea of what's most important to them. Then you want to read through the proposal, and I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you exactly what they want to hear. They're going to tell you exactly how to sell them. They're going to say, I want somebody who knows how to do this, can do this, will do this, and doesn't do this. They'll tell you the criteria by which they're going to evaluate you. So you want to identify those things and write them down. Just jot them down. These are the things that are most important to them. So you want to do that research, and you don't want to just analyze the project. You want to analyze, this is the mind shift, you want to analyze the client. Now, I've also done another video. Again, I've been putting out a lot of videos related to Upwork and so forth. I've done another video where I talk about how to research the jobs and how to effectively search for the right kind of jobs. And that highly, highly affects all of this about making sure the client's going to be a good client. And so when you're finding jobs and clients who are good clients, who you don't have to worry about, they're going to hire you, they're willing to spend good money for good work, then you can invest a little bit more time into your proposal, because if you win the job, it's going to be a good client who will pay, and they'll pay well. So it's worth investing that time. Now, that video is over at johnmorrisonline.com/search. I'll go ahead and redirect that link over there as well. But you can go there and that will show you how to search and find the best jobs and the highest paying clients on Upwork. But once you do that, then you want to analyze that client and see what they're looking for. What do they want? Because you're going to then use that in step number 2, which is the framework for writing your proposal. So I use a specific framework for writing the proposal. It's a 3-step framework. So the first step in that is to build credibility. So I was fortunate enough to have worked with some really high-profile clients like Michael Hyatt, Lewis Howes, Ray Edwards, Inc. Magazine, Tim Ferriss, etc. So I can name drop a little bit. And look, I know in most circles that'd be somewhat lame, but in this particular instance, if you can name drop, you absolutely want to do that because it helps build up your credibility. In people's minds, they'll say, well, if they know that person and they follow that person, they'll be like, well, if that person hired this guy, then, he must be good because they wouldn't have hired him otherwise. Right? So you can do some of that, but it's not necessary for you to have that, right? Because the research will tell you what credibility they're after. For example, I saw a job the other day where someone wanted an online PDF editor. This is actually an example I use in the video that I referenced. But they wanted an online PDF editor, and one of the questions that they asked was, have you ever worked with building these kinds of PDF templates before, and can you link me to some examples? That is the credibility they're after. Have you ever worked with them, and what are the examples? So it's not a testimonial from some well-known person that's going to convince that person. It's whether or not you've worked with those templates, and do you have examples? Those examples are going to be what the credibility that they need. If they look at those examples and go, wow, these are really good, that's going to be all the credibility that you need. So you really need to look through the proposal and find what credibility are they after? What's going to be the thing that convinces them that I am credible? And it's absolutely critical that you begin your proposal and what you say back to them with your credibility, by establishing credibility. Because if you don't, they're not going to believe anything else that you say. They have to first believe you're credible, and then they'll believe what you say after that. In fact, if you don't put the credibility up first, chances are they're going to look through what you wrote to find that first, and they may miss the rest of what you said. So you're going to put it right up front, establish your credibility first, and then go into the rest of it. So first step, build credibility. Second step is demonstrate reliability. Now, your job history, testimonials, portfolio, etc. will go a long way towards that. But in actually writing your proposal and your response back to them, the best way to demonstrate reliability is to show that you have an attention to detail. That's what they're going to be looking for. And how do you demonstrate and show them that you pay attention to detail? You call out specific things that they have written in their job description. And you talk about those things. Because that's going to show that you not only read the description, but you read it in detail. So you don't want to say, hey, I'm reliable. That's not what you say. You show them you're reliable by showing that you pay attention to detail. And you show that by calling out specific things that they wrote in their description so that they know that you read it, you understand it, and you read it in detail. That's the biggest way that you can demonstrate reliability in a job proposal. Right? You're very limited in what you can do to demonstrate reliability in that context, but that's the best way to do it that I found, is to pull out fine details of their description that makes sense for you to write back about in a job proposal and talk about those things. The final step in the framework then is to sell on value. This is how you become the one that gets hired at the higher pay level, where everybody's bidding really low, but you're bidding a lot more, but you still get hired, is you sell on value. Now, some people are uncomfortable with this. And again, I talk about this in the video, johnmorrisonline.com/proposals. But the way to do this is you need to, I think of this as like a splinter. You need to insert a splinter in their brain or in their mind which is to get them to think about this differently. Most clients go into this, how can I get the best for the least, right? And most people know that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You need to play on that idea. That I would start off this third paragraph with exactly these words. Look, I know you'll probably get people who are going to bid on this project for a really, really low price. But do you really want to put this project in the hands of the lowest bidder? Or do you want to put it in the hands of the person who's most qualified to do it and do it right? You need to almost say that specifically, because you need to put that in their head that them hiring the lowest bidder, them hiring the cheapest person, could actually end up being worse for them. And that it's worth them spending a little extra money to hire someone who they believe is the best fit to do that job. Now, you may not always be the one that they think is the best fit to do it, but as a general rule, you want them thinking along those lines so that when you do that, you're no longer competing on price. You have to get them off of competing on price. When you move them off of that, now you're competing on value, and then it's, do you have the portfolio? Do you have the testimonials? Did you write the proposal in the way that I've described to demonstrate that you're the one with the highest value? Now you get them bidding or thinking on which one is the most valuable, and then that's when you can get paid what you actually deserve for your project. So say those lines almost specifically to get them to put that splinter in their mind and really inject a little bit of fear about them hiring the lowest bidder. Most people, again, if you use that term lowest bidder specifically, I mean, most people have already kind of accept that idea that you don't necessarily want things built by the lowest bidder. You want them built by the most qualified. And so it usually hits people pretty hard, and they start thinking differently about the project. And that's the best that you can do. It's not going to win you every project, but it's the best that you can do to get them off a price and get them onto thinking about value. So those are the three. And then after that, of course, you go into talking about why you would be the most valuable person to hire, why you think you're the most valuable. You're the one that's has the most credibility to do the job right, not necessarily be the lowest bidder. So those are the three steps: build credibility, demonstrate reliability, and then sell on value. So that's research, that's the framework, and then the last thing is price. So how do you set the price correctly? And so I'm going to leave this one. You can go over to johnmorrisonline.com/proposals. You can check out the full video there. It's totally free over there. And I'll tell you exactly how to go through and bid your price. But there are three different kinds of prices. This is what I'll tell you. There's three different kinds of prices that you need to look at. And then you need to find where those kind of overlap to find the perfect price that you should put on your proposal. So I'm going to show you what those three different prices are, where to find them, and then how to bring them together to find kind of the overlap, to find that kind of sweet spot for pricing the project. All right. So again, that's johnmorrisonline.com/proposals. All right. Coming up next, we're going to get into our weekly Q&A. So I have a few questions here queued up. Also, as a reminder, I'm giving priority access to anyone who is a supporter over on Patreon at the $3 level, I believe it is, or above. You can get priority access to the Q&A. So if you want to have your question answered first, then you'll definitely want to make sure and head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon and become a supporting listener. All right, you're listening to The John Morris Show on johnmorrisonline.com. John Morris here for the Complete Web Developer course by Rob Percival on udemy.com. Now here's the deal with this. Do you ever get frustrated constantly searching the internet for tutorials to learn how to code? Are you worried that learning how to code is taking longer than it should? Do you just wish you could learn everything in one convenient place so you can get on with earning your living as a web developer? Well, that is exactly why Rob created the Complete Web Developer course. Everything you need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, PHP, MySQL, WordPress, APIs, and mobile apps in one convenient course. And you know it works because Rob has over 183,000 students and the most 5-star ratings of any course on Udemy. Now here's the best part. John Morris Show listeners can get an exclusive, and this is just for you guys only, an exclusive 85% discount on the course simply by visiting johnmorrisonline.com/CWDC. So look, quit pulling your hair out trying to find good tutorials on the web. Do the smart thing and hit up my man Rob's complete web developer course with the slick 85% discount right now. Visit johnmorrisonline.com/CWDC and you'll be all set. Welcome back to the John Morris Show, johnmorrisonline.com. It's time for our weekly Q&A, and I have a few questions queued up for you. Before we get into that, just a reminder, if you want to ask me a question, I am giving priority access to this Q&A for Patreon supporters over at johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. If you're, I believe it's a $3 and above supporter there, you get priority access to this Q&A, meaning if you ask a question there, I will answer those questions first. All right, so our first question comes from Genius Steven over on YouTube, and he says, I can see a day when we will no longer install apps on our cell phone anymore, but instead we will visit a URL like a website, and we'll have an experience of a website that will act and feel like a native application. It will behave just as good, and you can see an application natively installed on your phone. This is where I see things headed. What's your take on this? I don't know that I 100% agree that it'll be exactly like that, but I do think there is this melding of kind of mobile development and web development. More and more, those two things are kind of becoming synonymous. And so I think in that general sense, I agree with what you're saying, that there more and more that'll continue to kind of meld together to where when you go to visit, say, a website or something like that, or you go to interact with some sort of company or something, that the experience you have will be very, very native. Now, the way that I think it's going to develop is I think it's going to be where more and more you'll see the languages and tools used for developing on mobile apps will be more and more compatible with web technologies. And you'll see web technologies moving towards mobile apps a little bit, to where you kind of find this happy middle where if you know how to build websites, then you can very, very easily make the transition to building mobile apps. So I kind of think that that's where it's headed, to where it'll still be a native app, because I think there are some advantages still to that. And who knows, maybe that'll change, but it'll still be a mobile app. But it'll be developed with web technologies or web languages and work just like a native app does. So, it will be a native app, but it'll be developed with web technologies. Now, the reason I say that is because there's still a significant portion of the world that's on really slow internet. And so I think there is still at this point, and probably will be for a while, the value of having a native app that doesn't necessarily require an internet connection or a fast internet connection. Now, I agree here in, like, say, the United States, where the speeds, I mean, you got gigabit internet that's kind of starting to roll out. The speeds are getting to the point where if you go to a web page and it's mobile responsive, it'll respond almost like a native app because the internet speeds are so fast. But that's going to be really, really unique to certain developed areas. You're going to have a lot of other areas where having a native app that's not dependent on the internet will still have value to it. I just still feel like the two underlying languages of the web and of mobile apps are going to continue to mold more and more together, to where, again, as a developer, building a web page and building a mobile app isn't all that different. So that's where I see it going. Obviously, I have no idea. There could be something completely different that comes out, and we'll just have to see how it goes. And as developers, we'll just adapt. So, all right, next question is from Thomas Stab on YouTube. And so it was in response to a video. He said, you haven't said anything about Microsoft.NET and MVC. Is that a good direction? So to be honest with you, I don't know much about .NET. I don't know that .NET is ever going to be a huge thing. I mean, a lot of the open source languages have a real big stranglehold on the market. So I don't know if .NET's ever really going to be a huge thing, maybe. And if so, at that point, then I'll learn it. But I just don't know enough. I don't know much about .NET. Now, in terms of MVC, there's a couple of different, if you're talking about MVC in the broader sense, right? Because MVC was kind of a specific, I would say, architecture for, very specific set of software engineering that has now kind of been morphed into this broad overarching term that relates to all sorts of software architecture. So if you're talking about the broader sense, well, then yeah, absolutely. I've talked about MVC actually quite a bit in the past. Done some tutorials on it and so forth. And I do think it's the way to go. It's, it's how I build a lot of the stuff. The team I work on builds a lot of stuff, is using those kind of general principles and ideas. So I think MVC in the broader sense is a good way to go. So that's my thoughts on that stuff. Like I said, I just don't know enough about .NET to really to say much about it. All right, last question is from Lottie Edwards over on YouTube. Says, I'm new to Upwork and I'm wondering, am I wasting my time? I have never worked from home, nor do I have that much customer service experience. I'm a single mom on medical leave for major surgery and probably won't be released to go back yet. So I'm needing to get back to work. So if I could get some advice, please. So the one thing that sticks out to me about this is I'm not sure that web development, web design should be something that you should do or pursue as an interim type of setup. Now, I can't say here for sure if that's what you're saying, that web design, web development, because you just said you're on Upwork. Now, if you're doing something else on Upwork, some other sort of freelancing, because there's transcriptionists, there's all sorts of clerical stuff, and there's lots of things over there you can do besides web design, web development. I'm assuming because you're asking me if it's related to web design and web development. If that's the case, then I don't know if it's something that you can do as just an interim, because it takes, there's a learning curve that takes long enough that you'll probably be healed and back to doing what you're doing before you actually learn to the point that you can start taking clients over there. So I'm not sure if that's the case. However, if it's just something else on Upwork and trying to get some freelance stuff over there, I mean, absolutely. It does take some there's a learning curve as well there, but it's a lot quicker. And I've talked about some of this stuff in previous segment about, how to write job proposals. And I've done a number of videos on working on Upwork and so forth. So go through some of that stuff and you can very quickly get an idea of what you need to do. Now, that doesn't mean, this is the thing that people, I think, get lost on. It's like, oh, I know what to do now, so it's a guarantee. Nothing's a guarantee. Knowing what to do doesn't guarantee anything, because there's still things that you have to do, and doing those things can still be difficult. So, but it's a lot better coming from a place of knowing what to do instead of being confused and not knowing what to do, not having any sort of success, and just kind of giving up on the whole thing. So go through some of that training so you know what to do, and then you can better evaluate, okay, is this going to be a waste of time? Am I going to actually be able to do these things I need to do to start getting work before I get to the point where I'm healed up and so forth? So, I mean, I can't tell you exactly because I don't know exactly your situation, but I would say if you're just looking to do web design in the interim, I don't know if that's going to work out very well. However, being on Upwork doing something else, then yeah, if you're willing to put in a little bit of time and a little bit of effort to learn what to do and implement it and so forth, then I think you can have success. And who knows, maybe you'll get to the point where you don't need to go back to what you were doing before and you enjoy freelancing and you can make enough money where you can continue to do that. So that's my thoughts on that. All right, that'll wrap it up for this Q&A. It'll also wrap it up for this episode. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe over on iTunes, johnmorrisonline.com/iTunes, or on your Android device at johnmorrisonline.com/SoundCloud, and on YouTube at johnmorrisonline.com/YouTube. And if you would be so kind to become a supporting listener, I'd really, really appreciate it. It's support from listeners like you that allow this show to keep going and be free up here on YouTube. I have a lot of great bonuses over on Patreon, exclusive Patreon-only courses, access to all my source code, priority Q&A access, and a whole lot of other stuff over there. So go ahead and check it out, johnmorrisonline.com/Patreon. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Hey, quick question for you. Are you running a WordPress site? If so, then I want to recommend to you the premium WordPress hosting service, WP Engine. Now, what makes WP Engine different than a lot of web hosts out there is that it's designed specifically for WordPress with advanced caching and security implementation to keep your WordPress website up and running as fast as possible. And we all know how important speed is on the web these days. So if you're running WordPress and you don't have WP Engine yet, be sure to give it a look. You can get their best price at johnmorrisonline.com/WP Engine. Again, that's johnmorrisonline.com/WP Engine, all one word. Check them out. You're going to love your WordPress hosting.